The dust rose in small clouds with each dragging step Clara took across the barren prairie. Her arms, once strong from years of farm work, now trembled under the weight of her son. Little Samuel, barely 4 years old, hung limp against her shoulder, his breathing shallow and labored. The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly, turning the endless grassland into a furnace of desperation. Clara's dress, once a respectable blue calico, now hung in tatters, stained with sweat and the dust of too many miles walked. Her feet, wrapped in what remained of her boots, left bloody prints in the dirt. But she couldn't stop. Not when Samuel's lips were cracked and bleeding. Not when his eyes had taken on that glassy, distant look that spoke of hunger beyond what a child should know. 3 days. 3 days since they'd eaten anything more than the bitter roots she'd dug from the hard earth. A week since they'd been turned away from the last homestead. The woman's face hard as she'd slammed the door, muttering about widow's curse and bad luck following where death has been. Clara's throat constricted at the memory. Thomas had been dead 6 months now, taken by fever that swept through their small cabin like wildfire. The creditors had come within days. Vultures circling before his body was cold in the ground. They'd taken everything. The land, the livestock, even the wedding quilt her mother had sewn. All that remained was the debt, passed down to her like a millstone around her neck, and the men who came collecting with their leering smiles and wandering hands. She'd fled in the night with Samuel, believing surely somewhere in this vast country, someone would show mercy to a mother and child. But mercy, she'd learned, was as scarce as water in this drought-stricken land. "Mama?" Samuel whispered, his voice no more than a rasp. "Mama, I'm so tired." "I know, sweet boy, I know." Clara's own voice cracked like old leather. "Just a little further. Mama's going to find us somewhere to rest." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. They'd passed the last town 2 days ago, turned away from every door. No work for women here, they'd said. Try the saloon. But she knew what kind of work they meant, and she'd die before she'd subject herself or her son to that life. Ahead, through the shimmering heat waves, she spotted a thin line of smoke rising against the pale sky. Her heart, already racing from exhaustion, picked up its pace. Smoke meant people. People meant either salvation or another door slammed in their faces. But she had no choice. Samuel's weight seemed to double with each step. And she knew, God help her, she knew that if she didn't find help soon, she'd be burying her boy in this unforgiving earth. The smoke led her to a small horse ranch, set back from what passed for a road out here. The place wasn't much to look at, a rough cabin of logs chinked with mud, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, and a corral where a dozen horses milled about in the late afternoon light. But to Clara's desperate eyes, it looked like paradise. She paused at the gate, trying to summon strength she didn't have. Her hair, once her pride with its auburn shine, hung lank and filthy around her face. She knew how she must look, like a beggar, like trouble, like everything decent folk wanted to keep outside their fences. A man emerged from the barn, and Clara's breath caught. He was tall, built like the mountains she'd heard tell of but never seen, with shoulders that stretched his worn flannel shirt and hands that spoke of years of hard labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, making his age hard to gauge, anywhere from 30 to 45. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, was tied back with a leather cord. But it was his eyes that held her, gray as storm clouds, watching her with an intensity that made her want to both flee and fall to her knees. He didn't speak, just stood there with a bridle in one hand, waiting. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Clara swallowed what remained of her pride. It went down like broken glass. "Please," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "Please, sir, my boy, he's sick, hungry. We haven't—" She stopped, hating the tears that threatened. Crying wouldn't help. It never had. The man, Ethan, though she didn't know his name yet, remained silent, his expression unreadable as granite. Desperation clawed at Clara's chest. She'd sworn she'd never do this, never sink so low. but looking at Samuel's pale face, feeling his fevered skin against her neck, she knew she'd do anything, anything at all. "I'll work," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I can work with horses, tend gardens. I'm strong, or I was. I will be again if you just—" She took a shuddering breath. "I'll be your servant. No wages needed. Just shelter for my boy. Food. I'll sign papers. I'll wear chains if you want. I'll be property. Just please, don't let my baby die." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Clara felt something inside her break as she said them. Some last piece of the woman she'd been before Thomas died, before the world had shown her exactly how little a widow's life was worth. But if her dignity was the price for Samuel's life, she'd pay it gladly. The man's expression shifted slightly, though Clara couldn't read what passed behind those storm-gray eyes. He set the bridle on a fence post and walked toward them with measured steps. Clara instinctively tightened her hold on Samuel, even as her legs trembled with the effort of standing. Up close, she could see the details, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his jaw tightened as he looked at Samuel's small, still form. The boy sick or just hungry? His voice was deep, rough as the bark on a pine tree. "Hungry," Clara whispered. Maybe a touch of fever too. The sun, the walking." He nodded once, then turned and headed toward the cabin. When Clara didn't immediately follow, he glanced back over his shoulder. "You coming or not?" Clara's legs nearly gave out in relief. She stumbled after him, each step an effort of will. The cabin door stood open, and she hesitated at the threshold. Once she crossed it, she knew there'd be no going back. She'd offered herself as property, as less than human. Whatever this man wanted from her, she'd have to give. But Samuel stirred against her shoulder, a weak whimper escaping his lips, and her hesitation vanished. She stepped inside. The cabin was simple but clean. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner covered with a worn but clean quilt. A ladder led to what must be a loft. It smelled of wood smoke and leather, coffee and the faint scent of lye soap. After weeks of sleeping in barns and under stars, it seemed like a palace. "Set the boy down," the man said, gesturing to the bed. Clara reluctantly laid Samuel on the quilt, brushing his hair back from his burning forehead. He looked so small, so fragile against the rough fabric. Her heart clenched as his eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." The man moved to the stove, efficient and purposeful. Clara watched, confused, as he ladled water from a bucket into a pot, added something from a tin, and set it to heat. Was he cooking? "There's a pump out back," he said without looking at her. "Get yourself some water. You look ready to drop." Clara hesitated. I should stay with Samuel." "So, boy needs food more than he needs you hovering. Can't eat if you faint. Go!" It wasn't a request. Clara found herself obeying, her body moving on instinct. The pump was indeed out back, and the first splash of cool water on her face felt like salvation itself. She drank deeply, then washed the worst of the dirt from her face and hands. When she returned, the smell of soup filled the cabin. Simple fare, looked like beans and salt pork, but to Clara's empty stomach, it smelled like a feast. The man was coaxing Samuel to sit up, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he supported the boy's head. "Easy now," he murmured. "Just a sip at first." Clara rushed forward, but he held up a hand. "Slow, too much too fast and he'll sick it back up." She sank into one of the chairs, watching as this stranger, this man she'd just offered to enslave herself to, patiently fed her son small spoonfuls of broth. Samuel's eyes were more focused now, looking up at the man with a child's instinctive trust. "What's your name, boy?" the man asked. "Samuel," her son whispered. "Samuel Morrison?" "Well, Samuel Morrison. You think you can manage a bit more?" A tiny nod, another spoonful, then another. Clara found tears running down her face. silent and unstoppable. When had kindness become so foreign that it felt like a miracle? The man's eyes flicked to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not pity, she'd seen too much of that, and it always came with a price. This was something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "There's more in the pot," he said gruffly. "Eat." As Clara rose on shaking legs to serve herself, she realized she didn't even know his name. This man who'd taken them in, who was feeding her child, whose servant she'd sworn to become. She knew nothing about him except that in this moment, he was the difference between life and death. And that was enough. For now, it was everything. The silence in the cabin grew thick as prairie dust while Clara ate. Each spoonful of the simple soup felt like a betrayal of the desperation that had driven her here. Yet her body demanded it, gulping down the sustenance with animal urgency. The man, she still didn't know his name, had returned to feeding Samuel, patient as a mother with a newborn. Clara watched them through eyes blurred with exhaustion. Her son's color was already improving, the gray pallor giving way to something closer to his natural pink. The man's hands, so large they could probably snap a neck without effort, cradled the bowl with surprising delicacy. Who was this stranger who showed such care to a child not his own? When Samuel had taken all he could manage, the man settled him back against the pillow. The boy's eyes were already drooping, his small body giving in to the exhaustion that proper food allowed him to finally feel. "Sleep now," the man said, his voice a low rumble. Samuel's eyes closed without protest. Then those storm-gray eyes turned to Clara, and she felt her spine straighten instinctively. This was it, the moment when he'd name his price, when she'd learn what her desperate offer had bought her. But he only stood, joints popping slightly, and moved to the stove to pour himself coffee from a battered pot. He didn't offer her any, didn't speak, just leaned against the rough wall and studied her with an expression she couldn't read. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, the empty bowl forgotten on the table. Should she speak? Should she restate her offer? Should she begin working to prove her worth? The uncertainty gnawed at her worse than hunger ever had. "You running from something or someone?" he finally asked. Clara's throat constricted. "My husband died. Fever. The creditors. They took everything. And the men who held his notes, they wanted—" She stopped, unable to voice what Mason and his ilk had suggested as alternate payment. The man nodded once, as if her half-told story was enough. "Got a name?" "Clara Morrison." She lifted her chin slightly, clinging to this last shred of identity. "My boy is Samuel. Ethan Cross." He took another sip of coffee. "This is my place. Run horses, mostly. Break them for the army when they're buying." Clara waited for more, for the terms, the conditions, the chains she'd offered to wear. But Ethan just finished his coffee and set the cup aside. "Loft's empty," he said, gesturing to the ladder. "You and the boy can sleep up there." "But I said I'd work. I meant it. I'll do anything." "You're dead on your feet." His tone brooked no argument. "Can't work if you can't stand. Rest first." "I don't understand." The words burst out before Clara could stop them. "I offered to be your property, to sign papers." "Why are you—" "I heard what you offered." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, but not at her. She thought at something else, something that made his jaw tighten. "Get some rest, Mrs. Morrison." The use of her proper name made her throat close up. When was the last time anyone had called her that? Not widow or woman, or worse, but Mrs. Morrison, like she was still a person worthy of respect. "I need to know," she whispered. "What you expect, what you want from me. I need to know the terms." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then moved to a chest in the corner. He pulled out a couple of worn blankets, cleaner than anything Clara had seen in weeks. "Terms are simple," he said, not looking at her. "You and the boy need shelter. I've got room. You say you can work. Fine. There's always work on a ranch. But you're not property. Not mine, not anyone's. Clear. Clara stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. But I offered. I know what you offered. Now he did look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. A mother desperate enough to sell herself to save her child. I know what that kind of desperation looks like. There was a story there. Clara could feel it, but Ethan had already turned away, carrying the blankets to the ladder. Can you make it up on your own? Or do you need help? Pride warred with exhaustion. I can manage. There's a water bucket and basin up there. Chamber pot too. He moved back to Samuel, checking the boy's forehead with the back of his hand. I'll watch him tonight. Make sure the fever doesn't come back strong. He's my son. You should sleep. Ethan's tone was final. Can't take care of him if you're half dead yourself. Clara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. The simple meal, the warmth of the cabin, the knowledge that for tonight at least they were safe. It all combined to make her limbs feel like they were filled with lead. She stood on shaking legs, made it to the ladder. The rungs felt rough under her palms, solid and real. At the top, she found a small space with a straw mattress, the blankets Ethan had mentioned, and yes, a basin of water that looked crystal clear in the dim light filtering up from below. Mr. Cross, she called down softly, a grunt of acknowledgement. Thank you. Get some sleep, Mrs. Morrison. Clara washed her face and hands again, the cool water a blessing against her sunburned skin. Then she collapsed onto the mattress, not even bothering to remove her tattered dress. Below, she could hear Ethan moving around quietly, the scrape of a chair being pulled closer to the bed where Samuel lay. For the first time in 6 months, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety. She'd learned that safety was an illusion. But for tonight, her boy had food in his belly and a warm place to sleep. For tonight, a stranger with storm-gray eyes stood guard over her child. She should be suspicious. Should wonder what game Ethan Cross was playing, what he really wanted. Men didn't just take in desperate women and children without expecting something in return. But exhaustion was pulling her under like a riptide, and her last coherent thought was of those gentle hands feeding her son, the gruff voice saying, "You're not property." Below, in the main room, Ethan settled into the chair he'd pulled beside the bed. The boy, Samuel, slept fitfully, occasionally whimpering in his dreams. Ethan reached out, smoothing the child's hair with careful fingers. He'd seen that look in Clara Morrison's eyes before, the look of someone who'd been pushed past every boundary, who'd offer up pieces of their soul if it meant survival for those they loved. He'd seen it in his sister's eyes, years ago, before. He cut off that line of thought with practiced ease. The past was dead and buried, literally. What mattered now was the present, and in the present, a woman and child needed help. She'd offered to be property. The words still made his gut clench with old fury. How many women out here faced that same choice? How many found men who'd take them up on it, who'd use their desperation as chains? Not him, never him. Samuel stirred, mumbling something about horses. Ethan found his lips quirking slightly. Boys and horses, some things were universal. He'd let them stay. Let her work if she insisted. Pay her fair wages for it. Maybe in time, she'd stop looking like she expected him to demand payment in flesh for basic human decency. Maybe she'd even smile, though from the weight in her eyes, he doubted she remembered how. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Ethan glanced toward the window. Storm coming in from the west. The roof was sound, the walls solid. They'd weather it fine. He settled back in the chair, prepared for a long night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Clara Morrison struck him as the type who'd work herself into the ground trying to prove her worth. He'd have to watch that, make sure she didn't collapse from sheer stubborn pride. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, he'd keep watch over a fevered boy and let an exhausted mother sleep without fear. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things. But sometimes the small kindnesses were all that stood between a person and the abyss. The storm rolled in just after midnight, rain lashing against the windows. Samuel slept through it, and from the loft came the deep, even breathing of exhausted sleep. Ethan listened to the sounds of his suddenly unempty house and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Clara woke to the sound of her son's coughing. The thin, rattling sound cut through her exhausted sleep like a blade, and she was halfway down the ladder before her eyes were fully open. Gray dawn light filtered through the windows, showing her Ethan already at Samuel's side, supporting the boy as he struggled through the coughing fit. "Mama," Samuel wheezed, reaching for her. Clara rushed to him, gathering him into her arms. His skin burned against hers, far hotter than the night before. The fever hadn't broken. It had worsened. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Started about an hour ago." Ethan's face was grave. "Fever spiked just before dawn." Samuel's small body shook with another round of coughs, and Clara felt her heart constrict. She'd seen this before, in other children during the hard winters. Sometimes they recovered, sometimes— "I need willow bark," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "And wet cloths. If we can bring the fever down." "Don't have willow bark." Ethan was already moving, pulling a clean shirt from a trunk. He tore it into strips with efficient movements. "But there's whiskey. Small amount might help." Clara nodded, though the thought of giving spirits to a child went against everything she'd been taught. But desperate times called for desperate measures. She'd already offered to sell herself. What was a little whiskey compared to that? The next hours blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Clara bathed Samuel's burning skin with cool cloths, while Ethan kept the fire going and heated broth. They managed to get a few spoonfuls into the boy, mixed with a tiny amount of whiskey that made him cough, but seemed to ease his breathing slightly. "Please," Clara found herself whispering, rocking Samuel as he whimpered. "Please, God, not him too. Take me instead. Take anything, but not my boy." She wasn't aware she'd spoken aloud until she felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was steady, grounding. "There's a doctor in town," he said quietly. "Doc Harriman? Good man. I can't pay." The admission burned like acid. "I have nothing." "I didn't ask if you could pay." Clara looked up at him through eyes blurred with tears. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a crack in that granite facade. "Boy needs help. That's reason enough." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. Clara heard the sound of a horse being saddled, the creak of leather, then hoofbeats disappearing into the distance, alone with her son. Clara did what mothers had done since time began. She held him, rocked him, sang to him in a voice cracked with tears, the old hymns her mother had taught her, the lullabies she'd sung when he was a baby, before the world had turned cruel. Samuel's breathing was shallow, labored. His small fingers clutched weakly at her dress. "Story. Mama," he whispered. Clara's throat closed up. Thomas had been the storyteller, spinning tales of knights and dragons that made Samuel's eyes go wide with wonder. But Thomas was gone, and she was all Samuel had left. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there was a brave little boy who lived in a castle made of clouds." She spun the story from nothing, from desperation and love, watching her son's face for any sign of improvement. The sun climbed higher, sending dusty beams through the windows. The fire crackled. Time seemed to stop, contracted down to this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. When the door burst open, Clara nearly sobbed with relief. Ethan entered first, followed by a thin man with graying whiskers carrying a medical bag. "Mrs. Morrison," the doctor said, tipping his hat slightly. "Dr. Harriman, let me have a look at the boy." Clara reluctantly surrendered Samuel to the doctor's examination. Professional hands checked his pulse, his breathing, looked into his throat and eyes. "Lung fever." "Doctor," Harriman pronounced. "Seen a lot of it this season. The dust and heat don't help." He rummaged in his bag, producing a bottle of dark liquid. "Laudanum for the cough, just a drop or two in water. And this," another bottle, "is quinine, for the fever." "I can't pay you," Clara said, the words like ground glass in her throat. "Doctor." Harriman glanced at Ethan, something passing between them. "Mister, Cross and I have an arrangement. You just focus on getting this young man well." He gave detailed instructions on dosing, on keeping Samuel warm but not too warm, on encouraging fluids. Clara memorized every word, desperate for anything that might save her child. After the doctor left, Ethan helped her give Samuel the first dose of medicine. The boy struggled weakly, but swallowed, then fell into a restless sleep. "Thank you," Clara said, the words inadequate for the gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'll find a way to repay you, I swear it." "Stop." Ethan's voice was rougher than usual. "Just stop. The boy needed help. That's the end of it." "But the doctor's fee is between me and him." He moved to the stove, busying himself with coffee. "You need to eat something. Can't take care of him if you collapse." Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. She accepted the plate of beans and cornbread he offered, forcing herself to chew and swallow, though everything tasted like ash. Night fell again, bringing with it a new wave of fear. Samuel's fever had dropped slightly with the quinine, but his breathing was still labored, his cough wet and painful. Clara stayed by his side, cooling his skin with damp cloths, coaxing medicine between his lips. Ethan didn't go to bed. He sat in his chair by the fire, whittling something from a piece of wood. The steady scrape of knife on wood became a counterpoint to Samuel's breathing, a strange comfort in the dark hours. "You had children," Clara said suddenly, surprising herself. It wasn't a question. Ethan's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "No," but there was something in that single word, a weight that spoke of loss. Clara didn't push. She had no right to his secrets when he'd asked for none of hers. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Samuel stirred, and for the first time in 2 days, his eyes were clear when they opened. "Mama? I'm here, baby." Clara's tears came freely now, relief making her weak. "I'm right here. I'm hungry." Ethan made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That's a good sign." He prepared a simple porridge, thin enough for a sick child to manage. Clara fed it to Samuel slowly, her heart lifting with each spoonful he kept down. The medicine was working. Her boy would live, later, with Samuel sleeping naturally for the first time since the fever struck. Clara found herself standing on the porch beside Ethan. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I meant what I said," she began. "About working. I need to earn our keep." You always this stubborn." "Yes." That earned her a slight quirk of his lips, not quite a smile, but close. "There's work enough. Can you cook?" "Yes." "Good. Been living on beans and cornbread too long, but not today." He glanced at her, and she was surprised to see concern in those gray eyes. "Today you rest. Doctor's orders." "The doctor didn't say, 'My orders, then'?" His tone brooked no argument. "You've been running on nothing but fear and stubbornness. That's run out. Rest, eat. Take care of your boy. Work will still be there tomorrow." Clara wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. She'd pushed her body past its limits, and now that the immediate crisis had passed, it was demanding payment. "I don't understand you," she said softly. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vast prairie. "Don't need to understand me, Mrs. Morrison. Just need to get well. You and the boy both." He went inside, leaving Clara alone with the morning. She stayed there, breathing in the clean air, feeling the sun on her face. For the first time in months, she felt something besides fear and desperation. Hope, maybe, or at least the absence of immediate terror. Inside, she could hear Ethan moving around, the quiet sounds of a house with people in it. Samuel's breathing was easy now, peaceful. They had shelter, food, medicine. A man who asked for nothing but allowed them everything. Clara didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. Experience had taught her that kindness always came with a price. But for now, for this moment, she would take what was offered. She would rest, recover, and then she would work. She would earn their place here, prove their worth. Because whatever game Ethan Cross was playing, whatever he wanted in the end, Clara Morrison would not be beholden to anyone. She'd find a way to pay him back, every penny, every kindness. She just had to figure out why the thought of eventually leaving made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously like loss. The days fell into a rhythm as Samuel recovered. Clara threw herself into work with the fervor of someone trying to outrun a debt, rising before dawn to start the coffee and biscuits, spending her days scrubbing, mending, cooking. The cabin, already clean, began to shine under her determined hands. Ethan watched it all with those unreadable gray eyes, saying little. He'd leave before sunrise to work with the horses, returning for the noon meal covered in dust and sweat. Clara would have food waiting, nothing fancy, but hot and filling. Salt pork and beans gave way to stews with wild onions she found growing near the creek. Biscuits made light with careful kneading. Even a pie from dried apples she discovered in the pantry. "You don't need to work yourself to death," he said one evening, finding her darning yet another of his shirts by lamplight. Samuel was asleep in the loft, his breathing clear and easy now. "I'm earning our keep," Clara replied without looking up. Her fingers were cramped from holding the needle, but she didn't stop. "Already told you that's not necessary. It is to me." He made that sound again. Not quite a sigh, not quite a grunt, but he didn't argue further. Just settled into his chair with a week-old newspaper from town. The truth was, Clara needed the work. Not just to feel she was paying their way, but to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to dangerous places. Like how Ethan's presence had become comfortable rather than threatening. How she found herself listening for his footsteps on the porch. How Samuel had taken to following him around like a shadow when he felt well enough. Chattering about horses and asking endless questions that Ethan answered with surprising patience. It was the third week when everything shifted. Clara was kneading bread dough, her arms deep in the rhythm of push and fold, when she felt wetness on her hand. Looking down, she saw blood seeping through a crack in her palm that had refused to heal properly. The endless work had kept it raw and angry. She quickly wrapped it in a corner of her apron, hoping to hide it, but Ethan appeared in the doorway as if summoned. "Let me see." "It's nothing, just a scratch." "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped her protests cold. "Let me see." Reluctantly, she unwound the apron. The cut was ugly, inflamed at the edges. Days of lye soap and hot water had kept it from healing. Without a word, Ethan guided her to a chair. He returned with a basin of clean water, soft cloths, and a tin of something that smelled of herbs and tallow. "This'll sting," he warned, then began cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Clara bit her lip against the pain, studying his bent head as he worked. This close, she could see threads of silver in his dark hair, the web of lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. His hands were careful, treating her injury with the same patience he showed with a spooked horse. "Why don't you have a wife?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "Had one once." Clara waited, but he offered nothing more. "What happened?" "Cholera. Took her and my sister both, 5 years back." His voice was matter of fact, but Clara heard the old grief underneath. "Buried them out by the oak grove. Couldn't stay in the house after that, so I built this place." "I'm sorry." He shrugged, spreading the salve on her palm. "Life out here takes more than it gives. You know that better than most." His fingers wrapped clean cloth around her hand, tying it off neatly. But he didn't immediately let go, and Clara found herself frozen, acutely aware of his calloused thumb resting against her wrist. "You need to stop," he said quietly. "Stop trying to work yourself into the ground. Stop acting like you need to earn basic human kindness. I can't. Her voice came out rougher than intended. I can't owe anyone. Not again. Not after. She stopped, unwilling to voice what Mason and his ilk had demanded as payment for her husband's debts. Understanding flickered in Ethan's eyes. You don't owe me anything. Clara, not now. Not ever. You're not property. You're not a servant. You're a woman who needed help, and I was in a position to give it. That's all. Nothing is ever that simple. Sometimes it is. He released her hand but didn't move away. Sometimes people just help because it's right. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that in her experience, people always wanted something. But looking into his steady gray eyes, she found her cynicism wavering. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan Cross was exactly what he appeared to be, a decent man in an indecent world. A clatter from the loft broke the moment. Samuel's voice drifted down. Mama, Mr. Ethan. Coming, sweetheart, Clara called, grateful for the interruption. Whatever was happening between her and Ethan, she wasn't ready to examine it too closely. Samuel appeared at the top of the ladder, his color healthy now, though he was still too thin. Can I help with the horses today? Mr. Ethan, please? Ethan glanced at Clara, silently asking permission. She nodded, though her heart clenched at the thought of Samuel around those large animals. Just looking today, Ethan said firmly. No going in the corral without me. Yes, sir. Samuel practically flew down the ladder, his excitement palpable. Clara watched them go, her bandaged hand throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Through the window, she could see Ethan lifting Samuel onto the fence rail, pointing out different horses, explaining something that had the boy nodding eagerly. It was dangerous, this feeling growing in her chest. She'd come here desperate, broken, ready to sell herself for her child's survival. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't believed existed anymore, kindness without price, help without conditions. That evening, she made rabbit stew from a catch Ethan had brought in. As they ate, Samuel regaled them with everything he'd learned about horses, his eyes bright with enthusiasm Clara hadn't seen since before Thomas died. Mr. Ethan says Paint. That's the spotted one. Paint is the smartest horse he ever trained, Samuel informed her between bites. Says he can open gate latches with his teeth. That's so? Clara glanced at Ethan, who was hiding a smile behind his coffee cup. It's true. And the black mare, Midnight. She's going to have a baby horse in the spring. Mr. Ethan says I can help name it if we're still here. The casual assumption in Samuel's words, if we're still here, made Clara's chest tight. Her son was already thinking of leaving as conditional. Temporary, just like everything else in their lives had been. Samuel, time for bed, she said softly. But Mama. Mind your mother, Ethan said, and Samuel immediately stood, gave them both a gap-toothed grin, and headed for the ladder. When he was gone, Clara began clearing the dishes, her movements sharp with suppressed emotion. What's wrong? Ethan asked. He's getting attached. She kept her back to him, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. To this place, to you. When we have to leave. Who says you have to leave? Clara turned, soapy hands dripping. We can't stay here forever. Why not? The simple question left her speechless. Why not, indeed? Because nothing good lasted. Because depending on anyone's kindness was dangerous. Because the last man she'd trusted had died and left her with nothing but debt and desperate choices. Because, she said finally, unable to articulate the fear that gnawed at her. Ethan stood, crossed to her in 2 strides. Clara, look at me. She did, reluctantly, finding his face closer than expected. You want to leave when Samuel's stronger. I won't stop you, but you don't have to run. Not from here, not from me. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. How to accept help without expecting a trap. How to trust that you won't suddenly demand payment I can't give. Then don't trust me, he said simply. Trust what you see. Trust that I've had weeks to demand anything from you and haven't. Trust that your boy smiles now when he didn't before. Trust that you sleep at night without fear. Let that be enough for now. Clara felt tears threaten. hot and unwelcome. Why do you care what happens to us? Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability quickly hidden. Maybe because this house has been too quiet for too long. Maybe because your boy reminds me that there's still good in the world worth protecting. Maybe because... He stopped, jaw tightening as if physically holding back words. Because what? Clara prompted, her heart beating too fast. Because you remind me that strength isn't about never falling down, he said finally. It's about getting back up. And you, Clara Morrison, keep getting back up. This time, when the tears came, Clara didn't try to stop them. Ethan's thumb brushed one away, the gesture so gentle it broke something inside her. I'm tired of being strong, she confessed. Then stop, he said simply. For now, let that be enough. Later, after the dishes were done and the cabin was quiet, Clara stood on the porch looking out at the stars. They seemed brighter here than they'd ever been at the homestead, as if this little ranch existed closer to heaven. She heard Ethan come up behind her but didn't turn. Your hand feeling better? She flexed it experimentally. Yes, thank you. They stood in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. I was ready to die, Clara said suddenly. When I came here, I thought if I could just save Samuel, it didn't matter what happened to me. I would have done anything, been anything, even property. I know, but you wouldn't let me. No. Why? She felt rather than saw him shift beside her. My sister, he said after a long pause. Margaret. When her husband died, she faced the same choices you did. I wasn't there. Was off working a cattle drive, sending money back when I could. By the time I got home, he didn't finish, but Clara could fill in the rest. A desperate woman, limited choices, men willing to exploit that desperation. She didn't survive what came after, Ethan said quietly. Found her by the creek. Note said she couldn't stand the shame of what she'd had to become. I'm sorry, Clara breathed, understanding flooding through her. Can't save Margaret, he said, but maybe I could help you save yourself. Maybe that's enough to balance the scales a little. Clara turned to face him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not just a taciturn rancher who'd taken them in, but a man carrying his own grief, his own regrets. They were both walking wounded, trying to find their way in a world that showed little mercy to the broken. Thank you, she said, putting all the weight of her gratitude into those two words. He nodded, then surprised her with the ghost of a smile. Besides, you make better biscuits than I ever could. The unexpected humor startled a laugh from her, rusty from disuse but genuine. It felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Maybe, Clara thought as she followed him back inside, maybe Ethan was right. Maybe it was enough to just be for now. To let Samuel heal and grow strong. To let herself remember what it felt like to be treated with dignity and respect. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Men like Mason were still out there. The debts didn't disappear just because she'd run. But tonight, in this simple cabin with this complicated man, she could allow herself to believe in the possibility of grace. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The morning started like any other until the sound of approaching horses made Clara freeze at the wash basin. Through the window, she saw 3 riders coming up the trail, their shapes dark against the morning sun. Her heart hammered as she recognized the lead rider's slouch, the way he sat his horse like he owned the world. Mason Jennings. Samuel, she called, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Go to the loft, now. But Mama, now. Samuel. Something in her tone must have warned him because he scrambled up the ladder without further protest. Clara dried her hands on her apron, mind racing. Ethan was in the far pasture with the horses. She was alone. The riders stopped at the porch, and Mason swung down from his mount with practiced ease. He hadn't changed much in the months since she'd fled, still had that thin mustache he was so proud of, still wore his guns low on his hips like some dime novel gunslinger. Well, he drawled, his pale eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Clara Morrison. Been looking for you, darling." "I'm not your darling," Clara said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "And you're not welcome here." Mason laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Now that's not very neighborly, especially considering you still owe me money." "Your husband's debts didn't die with him, you know." The other two men dismounted, spreading out slightly. Clara recognized one, Jim Sloan, who'd worked as Mason's collector before. The other was younger, barely out of his teens, with nervous eyes and a twitchy gun hand. "I owe you nothing," Clara said. "Thomas's debts were settled when you took everything we had." "Everything but you," Mason corrected, stepping onto the porch. "Could have cleared it all, still can. My offer stands. Work for me for a year, and we'll call it square." Clara knew what kind of work he meant, the same kind his saloon girls did, the ones with dead eyes and laudanum habits. "No." Mason's face hardened. "Now see, that's where you're wrong. You don't get to say no to me. Not when you owe—" "The lady said no." Ethan's voice came from behind the house, calm as a summer morning. He walked into view unhurriedly, though Clara noticed his hand rested casual-like near his hip. He wasn't wearing a gun belt, but she knew he kept a rifle by the door. Mason's eyes narrowed. "This your new protector? Clara, you work fast." "Mr. Cross owns this ranch," Clara said quickly. "I work for him, as a housekeeper, nothing more." "That's so." Mason looked between them, a knowing smirk twisting his lips. "Well, Mr. Cross, I'm here on business. The widow owes me near $300. I'm willing to take payment in trade, if you know what I mean." "I know what you mean," Ethan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Answer's no. Now get off my land." "Your land?" Mason laughed. "You think you can just keep her? She's mine by rights, bought and paid for with every extension I gave her worthless husband." "Nobody owns her," Ethan said. "Nobody ever will. You got 10 seconds to mount up and ride out." The younger gunman's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Mason held up a hand. "Easy, Billy, Mr. Cross here doesn't understand the situation." He focused on Ethan. "See, I've got legal papers, promissory notes. I could have the sheriff out here by afternoon." "Sheriff Thompson?" Ethan's lips quirked slightly. "Go ahead. Ask him how his daughter's doing. Heard she recovered real well from that fever last winter. Amazing what good doctoring can do when someone covers the bill." Mason's face darkened as the implication sank in. "You think you're clever. I think you're leaving," Ethan said. "Question is whether it's vertical or horizontal." For a moment, the air crackled with potential violence. Clara held her breath, acutely aware of Samuel hiding in the loft above. Then Mason stepped back, that false smile returning. "This isn't over," he said, but he was already moving toward his horse. "Legal debts don't just disappear because some rancher wants to play hero. They do when the original papers were fraudulent," Ethan said conversationally. "Interesting thing about your promissory notes. Jennings, the interest rates you charge, 60% compounded monthly? Judge in Denver might have some opinions about that. Usury's still illegal in the territory." Mason went very still. "You wouldn't—" "Try me." The two men locked eyes for a long moment. Then Mason spat in the dirt and mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. "You just made an enemy. Cross," he said. "Hope she's worth it. Ride out," Ethan said. "Don't come back." They watched the three riders disappear into the distance. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Clara's legs give out. She sank onto the porch step, shaking. Ethan sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "How did you know?" she whispered. "About the interest rates? Had Doc Harriman look into it when he was in town?" Ethan admitted. "Man's got a lawyer friend in Denver. Turns out Jennings has been pulling this scheme on half the county. Loans money at illegal rates, then forces the widows to pay alternatively when their men die. But the sheriff gets a cut to look the other way. But he loves his daughter more than Jennings's money. Helped that I covered her doctor bills last winter." Clara stared at him. You've been planning this? Been preparing for it? Ethan corrected. Figured he'd show up eventually. Men like that don't let go easy. He'll be back, Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself. With more men, or with some other scheme, he won't just… Clara. Ethan's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Look at me. She did, finding his gray eyes fierce with determination. He won't touch you, he said simply. Not while I'm breathing. That's a promise. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care so much? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, looking out at the prairie. Told you about my sister. What I didn't say was that a man like Jennings was the reason she… He stopped, jaw working. Nathan Morse ran the general store, held loans on half the homesteads. When Margaret's husband died, Morse offered to help. Same deal Jennings offered you. Clara's throat closed up. She took it. For a month. Then she couldn't stand it anymore. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Clara could hear the pain underneath. Found her by the creek on a Sunday morning. Left a note saying she was too dirty for church, too dirty to live. Ethan, I killed him, he said quietly. Morse made it look like an accident. He was drunk most nights anyway. Nobody questioned when he fell down his store stairs and broke his neck. He finally looked at her. That's why I left Missouri. Why I came here, not running from the law. Exactly. But from what I'd done. What I'd failed to do in time. Clara should have been frightened by his confession. Should have gathered Samuel and run from this man who admitted to murder. Instead, she found herself turning her hand under his, interlacing their fingers. He deserved it, she said fiercely. Maybe, but it didn't bring Margaret back. He squeezed her hand gently. Can't save her, but I can damn sure save you and Samuel from the same fate. We're not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're not. You're my choice. The simple words hit her harder than any declaration could have. Choice. When had anyone chosen her? Not as a last resort, or a convenience, or a debt to be collected, but simply chosen. Mama? Samuel's voice from the doorway made them both turn. He stood there, eyes wide with worry. It's all right, sweetheart, Clara said, opening her arms. He flew into them, burying his face against her shoulder. Were those bad men? He whispered. Yes, Clara said, seeing no point in lying. But Ethan made them leave. Samuel peeked at Ethan over Clara's shoulder. Will they come back? Maybe, Ethan said honestly. But if they do, we'll be ready. Want to learn something that might help? Samuel nodded eagerly. And Ethan stood. Going into the house, he returned with something Clara hadn't expected, a slingshot, beautifully made from polished wood. Every boy should know how to protect his family, Ethan said, kneeling to Samuel's level. This was mine when I was your age. Think you're old enough to learn? Yes, sir. Samuel's fear transformed into excitement. Good, but first, you need to promise something. This isn't a toy. It's a tool, and maybe a weapon. You only use it when your mama says, or if someone's trying to hurt you or her. Understand? Samuel nodded solemnly. I promise. Clara watched them in the yard, Ethan patiently showing Samuel how to hold the slingshot, how to aim. Her heart felt too large for her chest, aching with something she didn't dare name. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she found herself humming. It took her a moment to realize what she was doing. She hadn't hummed since before Thomas got sick. The simple melody felt like rebellion against all the darkness that had tried to swallow her. That's pretty, Ethan said from the doorway. Clara flushed. My mother used to sing it. Barbara Allen. It's called. Sing it? I don't really sing. Please? The request was so gentle, so unexpected from this taciturn man, that Clara found herself nodding. As she worked, she let her voice rise in the old ballad, soft at first, then stronger. It was a sad song, about love and loss and regret. But somehow singing it felt like releasing something that had been trapped in her chest. When she finished, she turned to find Ethan watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. something soft and wondering and deeply vulnerable. "Beautiful," he said quietly, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the song. Later, after Samuel was asleep, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. "I need to teach you to shoot," Ethan said suddenly. Clara's stomach clenched. "You think they'll come back that soon?" "Not just them. World's full of men who think a woman alone is easy prey. You need to be able to protect yourself and Samuel if I'm not here." "You're planning on going somewhere?" "No," he said firmly. "But I'm not foolish enough to think I can always be around. You need to know you can stand on your own if it comes to it." Clara thought about arguing, then nodded. He was right. Depending entirely on someone else's protection was just another kind of cage, even if the protector meant well. "All right," she said. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, after breakfast." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara asked, "What you said to Mason about the sheriff's daughter, was that true?" "Every word. Sometimes the best defense is knowing which debts matter most to a man. And Jennings? Will he really stay away?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "For now. But men like him, they're like rattlesnakes. Even when you can't see them, they're there, waiting to strike. We need to be ready." "We," Clara repeated softly. Such a simple word. But it held worlds of meaning. "We," Ethan confirmed. "You're not alone in this anymore, Clara. Not unless you choose to be." She thought about that, about choices and chains and the different kinds of freedom, about a man who could have taken advantage of her desperation but instead offered dignity, about second chances and unexpected grace. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Ethan said. "Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it keep you from living." Clara looked at him in the starlight, this complicated man who carried his own ghosts but still had room to shelter hers. Tomorrow she'd learn to shoot. Tomorrow they'd face whatever came next. But tonight, sitting beside him in the quiet darkness, she felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Safe. The rifle felt alien in Clara's hands, heavy and cold despite the warm morning sun. She stood in the yard behind the cabin, Ethan beside her, his presence both reassuring and distracting. "Don't fight the weight," he instructed, his voice patient. "Let it settle into your shoulder. The gun's your partner, not your enemy." Clara adjusted her stance, trying to mimic what he'd shown her. The wooden stock pressed against her shoulder felt like a reminder of how far she'd fallen from the gentle life she'd once imagined for herself. "See that tin on the fence post?" Ethan pointed to a rusty can he'd set up 30 yards away. "That's your target. Don't think about hitting it yet. Just get comfortable holding the rifle." "It's heavier than I expected," Clara admitted. "Winchester 73. Good rifle, reliable." He moved behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "May I?" She nodded, and he reached around to adjust her grip. His hands were gentle but sure, positioning her fingers correctly on the stock and trigger guard. Clara found herself acutely aware of his nearness, the scent of leather and soap and something uniquely him. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You're holding it like it might bite you." Clara forced herself to relax, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Better. Now. Sight down the barrel. See that little notch at the end? Line it up with the groove here." He guided her aim with the lightest touch. "When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it." The first shot went wide, the recoil surprising Clara even though she'd braced for it. The sound echoed across the prairie, startling a few birds from the nearby cottonwoods. "Again," Ethan said simply. The second shot was closer. The third actually hit the fence post, if not the can. By the 10th shot, Clara's shoulder ached, but she'd managed to hit the tin twice. "Not bad," Ethan said, taking the rifle to reload. "You've got steady hands." "Steady?" Clara laughed shakily. "I feel like I'm trembling all over. That's natural. First time I shot a rifle, I nearly dropped it after—" He handed it back to her. Again. They spent 2 hours in the morning sun, until Clara's arms shook with fatigue and her shoulder would surely bruise. But by the end, she could hit the tin more often than not. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Clara asked as they walked back to the cabin. "Teaching me this?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "My sister never learned. Always said there'd be time later, or that her husband would protect her. But sometimes, later doesn't come. And sometimes the people who should protect us aren't there." Samuel came running from the barn where he'd been helping muck stalls, a chore he'd begged for, wanting to be near the horses. "Mama, did you really shoot the gun? I heard it." "I did," Clara confirmed, ruffling his hair. "Mister, Ethan's teaching me. Can I learn too?" "When you're older," Ethan said. "For now, you keep practicing with that slingshot. Show your mama what you learned yesterday." Samuel demonstrated enthusiastically. Managing to hit a fence rail from 10 paces, Clara praised him. But her mind kept drifting to the weight of the rifle, the power it represented. Power to protect, but also to destroy. She wondered if she could actually shoot a man if it came to it. That afternoon, while Ethan worked with a new horse and Samuel napped, Clara found herself standing before the small mirror in the cabin. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, sun-browned where she'd once been pale, lean muscle where there had been soft curves. Her hands, once smooth, now bore calluses from work, but it was her eyes that had changed most. The desperation was gone, replaced by something harder, more determined. She was no longer the woman who'd arrived here begging to be a servant. But who was she becoming? The sound of horses, multiple horses, made her heart skip. But when she looked out, she saw it was only Doc Harriman's buggy, accompanied by another rider she didn't recognize. Ethan emerged from the barn as the visitors dismounted. The stranger was a woman, Clara realized with surprise. Middle-aged, wearing a practical divided skirt and a no-nonsense expression. "Mrs. Morrison," Doc Harriman called cheerfully. "I've brought someone who'd like to meet you. This is Mrs. Catherine Walsh. She runs the school in town." Clara stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ma'am, Mrs." Walsh studied her with sharp blue eyes. "Dr. Harriman tells me you have a boy, school age." "Samuel's only 4, nearly 5, Samuel corrected, appearing from inside with the sleep-tousled hair. "5 is old enough to start learning letters and numbers." "Mrs." Walsh said. "The school's small, but we manage. Would you be interested in enrolling him?" Clara's throat tightened. School meant normalcy, meant putting down roots. It meant accepting that they might stay. We don't live in town," she managed. "Several of our students come from the outlying ranches. The Baxter children ride in 3 miles each way." "Mrs." Walsh's expression softened slightly. "Education is important. Mrs. Morrison, especially out here where opportunities are limited." "Can I go to school, Mama?" Samuel asked, eyes bright with excitement. "Please." Clara looked at Ethan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We'll think about it," she told Mrs. Walsh. "Term starts in 2 weeks. The teacher said, we'd be glad to have him." She paused, then added, "We could also use help with the younger children, if you're ever interested in town work. The pay isn't much, but—" "Thank you," Clara interrupted gently. "I'll consider it." After the visitors left, Clara found herself pacing the cabin like a caged animal. Ethan came in to find her wringing a dishcloth into knots. "What's wrong?" "School," Clara said. "He wants to go to school." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's permanent. It's deciding to stay. Really stay." She turned to face him. "What if Mason comes back? What if someone recognizes us? What if—" "Clara," Ethan caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "You can't live your whole life on what if. Samuel deserves a chance at normal." "Normal." Clara laughed bitterly. "I don't even remember what that is. Then maybe it's time to learn." She looked up at him. This man who'd taken them in without questions, who was teaching her to defend herself while also encouraging her to hope for a future that didn't require it. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I know." His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. "But that's no reason to stop living." That evening, as Clara served dinner, Samuel chattered excitedly about school, about learning to read, about making friends. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Clara found herself smiling despite her fears. "Mr. Ethan, did you go to school?" Samuel asked. "Some. Learned my letters and numbers, enough to get by." Ethan glanced at Clara. "Your mama, though, I bet she was a good student." "I was," Clara admitted. "I loved books. Used to dream of being a teacher myself. Before," she trailed off. "Why couldn't you still?" Ethan asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Why couldn't she? Because she was a widow? Because she'd been desperate enough to offer herself as property? Because the world had shown her how cruel it could be? Or because she'd stopped believing she deserved good things? Later, after Samuel was asleep, Clara found herself on the porch with Ethan again. It had become their ritual, these quiet evening moments. "Mrs. Walsh's offer," Clara began, "about helping at the school. Do you think—" "I think you'd be good at it," Ethan said immediately. "You're patient with Samuel, firm when you need to be, and you said you loved learning. But it would mean going to town, being around people. They might ask questions. Let them ask." His voice held an edge. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." "Clara, nothing? Haven't I?" She thought of that desperate day when she'd offered to wear chains. "I was ready to save your son," Ethan interrupted firmly. "Any parent would understand that, and anyone who doesn't isn't worth worrying about." Clara was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Would you mind if I took the work? It would mean less time here, less help with the ranch." "I managed before you came," he reminded her. "But Clara, don't do it for me or even for the money. Do it because you want to." Want. Such a foreign concept. For so long, everything had been about need, about survival. The idea that she could want something, choose something just because it appealed to her, seemed almost decadent. "I'll think about it," she said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Then Ethan cleared his throat. "There's something else. The harvest dance is coming up in town, 2 weeks from Saturday." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Everyone goes. Families, children. It's expected." Clara tensed. A social gathering meant exposure, meant questions, meant pretending to be normal when she still felt like she was barely holding herself together. Samuel would enjoy it. Ethan continued, "And it might be good for you both, to be part of the community. Would you go with us?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. "If you'd like me to." Clara turned to look at him, this complicated man who offered protection without possession, who pushed her toward independence while making it clear she wasn't alone. "As friends?" she asked carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? But he nodded. "As whatever you need us to be." The next morning, Clara woke with a new determination. She sought out Ethan at breakfast. "I want to learn to shoot the pistol too," she announced. "And I'll take Mrs. Walsh up on her offer. And yes, we'll go to the harvest dance." Ethan's smile was slow but genuine. "All right then. But I need something else." Clara continued, gathering her courage. "I need to know that if something happens, if Mason comes back, or if—" She swallowed hard. "I need to know Samuel will be safe. Will you promise me that no matter what happens to me, you'll look after him?" Ethan set down his coffee cup and looked at her steadily. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway." "I promise," he said solemnly. "But Clara, I protect what's mine, and whether you admit it or not, you and Samuel, you're under my protection now. That means something out here." "We're not yours," Clara said automatically, though the words lacked heat. "No," Ethan agreed. "But you're here. You're staying. That makes you mine to protect." if nothing else. Clara thought about arguing, about asserting her independence yet again, but looking at this man who'd shown them nothing but kindness, who was teaching her to be strong while making it clear she didn't have to be strong alone. She found herself nodding. "Teach me to shoot the pistol," she said instead. "If I'm going to be part of this place, this life, I want to be ready for whatever comes." "That's my girl," Ethan said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "That is, I know what you meant," Clara said, surprising herself with a small smile. "And Ethan, thank you for all of it." He nodded, color rising slightly in his weathered cheeks. "Best get to it then. Day's wasting." As Clara followed him out to resume her shooting lessons, she felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Not just hope, but anticipation. For Samuel's school. For her own possible work. For a dance where she might remember what it felt like to be just a woman. Not a widow or a debtor or a desperate mother. She was still scared. Mason was still out there, along with all the other dangers of frontier life. But she was no longer helpless, no longer alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future on. The red sunset painted the sky like blood when they came. Clara was in the garden, pulling the last of the carrots for dinner, when the thunder of hooves made her freeze. 8 riders, dark silhouettes against the dying light, approaching fast from the eastern trail. Mason Jennings led them, but this time he'd brought harder men. Clara recognized the Coulter brothers, notorious for their work as enforcers, and Jake Mullins, who'd spent 3 years in territorial prison for killing a homesteader. The others were strangers, but their type was familiar, men who sold their guns and consciences to the highest bidder. "Samuel!" Clara called, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Get to the house, now!" Her son appeared from behind the chicken coop, saw the riders, and ran. Clara followed, her mind racing. Ethan was in the north pasture, checking on a lame horse, too far to hear gunshots, too far to help. She made it to the porch just as the riders reined up. Mason's smile was all teeth and malice. "Evening, Clara. Brought some friends to help collect what's mine." "Get off this land," Clara said, backing toward the door. The rifle Ethan kept there was loaded, ready. She just had to reach it. "Now, that's not friendly." Mason dismounted, spurs jingling. "See, I've been thinking." "Your protector threatened me with lawyers and such. But lawyers don't mean much out here when accidents happen. Ethan will... Cross is 2 miles away." Jake Mullins interrupted, spitting tobacco juice. "Saw him ourselves. By the time he gets back, we'll be long gone, with you." Clara's hand found the door latch. "Samuel, get the..." "Ah." Mason drew his pistol, casual as pulling out a pocket watch. "Let's not make this harder than necessary. You come quiet-like, and maybe your boy doesn't watch his mama get dragged off screaming." "You bastard," Clara breathed. "Such language." Mason tisked. "That's what happens when a woman lacks proper guidance. Don't worry, darling. I'll teach you manners soon enough." One of the Coulter brothers laughed, an ugly sound. "Might teach her a few things myself." Clara's hand closed on the door latch. In one motion, she yanked it open, grabbed the rifle, and spun back to face them. The Winchester's barrel swept across the group, making several horses dance nervously. "First man moves, gets a bullet," she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. Mason's smile faltered. "You won't shoot. You're not a killer." "Clara, try me." She settled the rifle against her shoulder exactly as Ethan had taught her. "I've got nothing left to lose except my boy. That makes me dangerous." 8 of us. 1 of you," Jake pointed out. "Even if you get 1 shot off..." The crack of a rifle from the barn cut him off. One of the strangers cried out, clutching his shoulder as he toppled from his saddle. "Make that 2 of us," Samuel called from the barn's hay door, Ethan's hunting rifle smoking in his small hands. He'd remembered the lessons, remembered where Ethan kept the spare weapons. "You little brat!" Mason snarled, swinging his pistol toward the barn. Clara didn't think. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and Mason's hat flew off. A neat hole punched through the crown. He froze, face pale. "Next one goes through your head," Clara promised. "Samuel, you all right?" "Yes, Mama." Her son's voice was high with fear and adrenaline, but steady. "Good boy. Anyone else moves, you shoot them." "Yes, Mama." The wounded man writhed on the ground, moaning. His horse had bolted, and the others were getting nervous, their riders fighting to control them. "This is crazy," one of the strangers muttered. "Nobody said nothing about the woman being armed." "Shut up," Mason snarled, but Clara could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd expected to find her helpless, defenseless. The rifle in her hands changed everything. "Here's what's going to happen," Clara said, surprising herself with her calm. "You're going to get on your horses and ride out. You're going to forget about me, about whatever claim you think you have. Because if I see any of you again, I won't aim for your hat. You can't stay awake forever," Jake Mullins said. "Can't watch every window, every door." "No," Clara agreed. "But I can make sure some of you don't live to see me fail. Starting with Mason. You boys willing to die for his grudge?" The riders exchanged glances. Clara could see the doubt creeping in. Hired guns were practical men. No profit in dying for another man's cause. "She's bluffing," Mason insisted, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Am I?" Clara shifted her aim slightly. The rifle barrel now pointed directly at Mason's chest. "You knew my husband. Mason, you know what kind of man he was? Gentle, weak. You called him... Well, he's dead, and I'm what's left. You made me this way. You and men like you, who think a woman alone is easy prey." "Boss," one of the Coulter brothers said uneasily. "Maybe we should." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut him off. Not from the pasture, but from the main road. Clara risked a quick glance and felt her heart leap. 3 riders coming fast, and she recognized the lead horse, Ethan. But how? The riders reined up hard, and Clara saw that Ethan wasn't alone. Sheriff Thompson and his deputy flanked him, both men armed and badges gleaming in the fading light. "Evening, gentlemen," the sheriff said mildly, though his hand rested on his pistol. "Seems we've got a situation here." "Sheriff," Mason started. "This woman is defending her home," Thompson interrupted, "which is her legal right. Whereas you boys appear to be trespassing and threatening a widow and child, that's a hanging offense in some parts. You can't be serious." Jake Mullins protested. "You know what she owes." "I know Jennings here has been running an illegal lending operation," the sheriff said. "Had a real interesting telegram from a judge in Denver about that. Seems the territorial governor's taking an interest too. Something about usury and coercion." Ethan had dismounted and now stood beside Clara, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "We're fine," Clara replied, not lowering the rifle. "Samuel's in the barn." "I know. Saw him when we rode up. Good shooting, both of you." Mason's face had gone from pale to purple. "This isn't over. Cross. You can't protect her forever." "Don't have to," Ethan said conversationally. "Just long enough for the federal marshals to arrive. Did I mention I wrote to them? About your various business ventures? They were real interested in that stage holdup last year. The one where the guard identified a man matching your description." "You're lying." "Maybe." Ethan shrugged. "Want to wait around and find out?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat. "Way I see it, you boys have 2 choices. Ride out now, peaceful-like, and keep riding. Or stay and explain to a judge why 8 armed men were threatening a woman and child. Don't forget assault," Ethan added helpfully. "That's Clara's blood on her garden spade where she fell. And terroristic threats. Oh, and attempted kidnapping, from what I heard riding up." The wounded man had managed to climb to his feet, supported by one of the others. "I need a doctor," he whined. "Should have thought of that before you came here," Thompson said without sympathy. "Doc's in town. Better ride fast." One by one, the riders began turning their horses. Mason was the last to move, his eyes burning with hatred as he stared at Clara. "This isn't over," he repeated. "Yes, it is," Clara said quietly. "Because if you come back, I won't hesitate. I won't aim to wound. I'll put you in the ground, and I'll sleep sound after." Something in her voice must have convinced him because Mason wheeled his horse around violently. "Let's go," he snarled at his men. They watched the riders disappear into the growing darkness. Only when they were out of sight did Clara lower the rifle. Her hands started shaking then, violent tremors that made her teeth chatter. Ethan gently took the weapon from her nerveless fingers. "Samuel," he called. "You can come out now, son." Samuel emerged from the barn, still clutching the hunting rifle. His face was pale but determined. "Did I do good, Mr. Ethan?" "You did perfect." Ethan knelt to the boy's level. "You protected your mama just right. I'm proud of you." Samuel flew into Clara's arms, and she held him tight, breathing in the little boy's scent of hay and dirt and safety. "How did you know?" she asked Ethan over Samuel's head. "How did you get here so fast?" "Saw them riding in from the ridge," he explained. "Figured they weren't coming for a social call. Rode straight to town for the sheriff." Thompson nodded. "Good thing, too. Would have been bad if we'd arrived after the shooting started in earnest." "Will they really stay away?" Clara asked. The sheriff and Ethan exchanged glances. "Mason's smart enough to know when he's beat." Thompson said, "Especially with federal interest, he'll find easier prey elsewhere. And if he doesn't, then we'll deal with it." Ethan said simply, "Together." After the sheriff and his deputy left, promising to keep an eye out for trouble, Clara found herself sitting on the porch steps. Samuel curled against her side. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "I did it," she said wonderingly. "I stood up to them." "You did more than that," Ethan said, sitting on her other side. "You showed them you're not a victim. You're a woman who'll fight for what's hers. I was terrified, but you didn't let it stop you." He was quiet for a moment. "That was good thinking. Samuel, getting to the barn. How'd you know to do that?" Samuel peeked up at him. "You said a man protects his family." "I'm not a man yet, but Mama's my family." Clara's throat closed up with emotion. Her little boy, forced to grow up too fast, but growing up strong. "I think we all need some supper," she said finally. "And maybe some of that apple pie I made yesterday." "Pie?" Samuel perked up immediately. As they went inside, Ethan caught Clara's arm gently. "You know this changes things." "What do you mean?" "You're not the same woman who came here begging to be a servant. You're not looking to be saved anymore." His gray eyes were serious. "Question is, what do you want now?" Clara looked at him. This man who'd given her shelter and dignity and the tools to defend herself, who'd stood by her without trying to own her. "I want to stop running," she said quietly. "I want to build something. A life. A real home. Here, if you'll have us." "Clara, not as your servant," she continued, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "Not as someone under your protection, but as whatever we might become. Together." Ethan's hand cupped her cheek, work-roughened thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You sure?" "I'm sure I'm tired of being afraid." Clara said, "I'm sure Samuel deserves better than a mother always looking over her shoulder. And I'm sure that you're a good man. Ethan Cross. Maybe the best I've known." He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "You deserve care. Clara Morrison. Not chains, not fear, not debt. Just care." "Then care for me," she whispered, "and let me care for you." When he kissed her, gentle and careful, Clara felt something inside her finally unclench. The woman who'd arrived here desperate and broken was gone. In her place stood someone new, scarred but strong, cautious but capable of trust. "Mama?" Samuel called from inside. "I'm hungry." They broke apart, both laughing softly. "Coming, sweetheart," Clara called back. As they went inside together, Clara realized the house no longer felt like a refuge she might have to flee. It felt like home, and for the first time since Thomas died. She believed she might actually deserve it. The night after the confrontation was sleepless for Clara. She lay in the loft, listening to Samuel's peaceful breathing, her mind replaying the moment she'd aimed the rifle at Mason, the weight of what could have happened pressed against her chest like stones. Below, she could hear Ethan moving around, keeping watch. He'd insisted on staying awake, rifle across his knees, just in case Mason's wounded pride drove him to return. But the night passed quietly, with only the usual sounds of coyotes and wind through grass. When dawn painted the sky pale pink, Clara descended the ladder to find Ethan making coffee. He looked tired but alert, the kind of weariness that came from vigilance rather than exertion. "You should have slept," she said softly. "Couldn't." He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing. Kept thinking about what might have happened if Samuel hadn't been so quick thinking. But he was. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "We were." "Yes." Ethan studied her face. "You were magnificent. You know, the way you stood them down. I was terrified. Most courage comes wrapped in fear." He moved to the window, checking the horizon out of habit. "Clara, there's something I need to say." She waited, heart suddenly racing. "Yesterday, when I saw them surrounding the house, when I thought—" He stopped, jaw working. "I realized something. This place has been half dead since Margaret and my wife passed. Just me going through the motions, keeping the ranch running but not really living. Then you and Samuel came, and suddenly there was laughter again. Cooking smells that made sense. A reason to come home beyond just sleeping. Ethan, let me finish." He turned to face her. "I know you came here desperate. I know you offered things no woman should have to offer. But somewhere between that first night and now, you became essential. You and Samuel both. Not as servants or charity cases, but as family." Clara set down her cup, her hands trembling. "What are you saying?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, then did something that stunned her. He knelt, right there on the rough wooden floor. "I'm saying I don't want you to stay because you need shelter. I want you to stay because this is your home, yours and Samuel's." He reached into his pocket, pulling out something that caught the morning light. "This was my mother's. Been sitting in that chest for 5 years. Waiting." It was a ring. Simple gold with a small ruby, worn smooth by years of work and weather. Clara's breath caught. "Ethan Cross, are you—" "I'm asking you to marry me, Clara Morrison. Not because you need protection, not because it's practical, but because I love you. Because Samuel feels like my son already. Because when I thought I might lose you yesterday, it about tore me in half." Clara sank to her knees in front of him, tears streaming down her face. "I came here ready to be property. You're offering to make me a partner." "Equal partners," he confirmed. "In the ranch, in life, in everything. You deserve care. Clara, not chains. Let me spend my life proving that to you." "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper, then stronger. "Yes, Ethan, yes." His hand shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Mama?" Samuel's voice from the ladder made them both turn. "Why are you crying? Are you hurt?" "No, sweetheart," Clara said, opening her arms as he scrambled down. "These are happy tears." "The happiest," Ethan added, ruffling the boy's hair. "Samuel, how would you feel about me becoming your PA?" Samuel's eyes went wide. "For real? Forever?" "For real and forever," Ethan confirmed. The boy launched himself at Ethan, small arms wrapping around his neck. "Yes, yes, yes, yes!" Clara joined the embrace, and for a moment they stayed there, a family formed not by blood but by choice, by survival, by love forged in hardship and trust. The wedding was simple, held 2 weeks later in the small church in town. Clara wore her best dress, the blue calico she'd mended so many times, with wildflowers in her hair. Samuel stood beside them, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. The townspeople had embraced them with surprising warmth. News of Clara's stand against Mason and his men had spread. Earning her respect, Mrs. Walsh offered her the teaching position on the spot, saying any woman who could face down 8 armed men could certainly handle a classroom of children. Doc Harriman served as Ethan's best man, while Mrs. Walsh stood with Clara. Sheriff Thompson was there, tipping his hat with approval. Even some of the neighboring ranchers attended, their wives bringing covered dishes for the modest reception. "You clean up nice," Clara whispered to Ethan as they stood before the preacher. "You're beautiful," he replied, and the raw honesty in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of care. Samuel cheered, the sound echoing in the small church and drawing laughter from the congregation. As they signed the marriage certificate, Clara noticed her hand was steady, no trembling, no fear. She signed her new name with a flourish, Clara Cross. The reception was held at the schoolhouse, with fiddle music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Clara danced with Ethan, with Samuel standing on her feet, with Doc Harriman, who told embarrassing stories about Ethan's bachelor cooking. "Happy?" Ethan asked as they took a break, watching Samuel play with the other children. "More than I thought possible," Clara admitted. 6 months ago, I was ready to—" She stopped, not wanting to darken the day with those memories. "That was 6 months ago," Ethan said firmly. "This is now. And now, you're my wife. Samuel's my son, and we have a life to build together. No chains," Clara murmured. "Never chains, only choices." He spun her back onto the dance floor. "And you chose us, the best choice I ever made." They returned to the ranch as the moon rose full and bright. Samuel fell asleep in the wagon, worn out from excitement and too much cake. Ethan carried him inside, settling him in what would now be his permanent room, no more sleeping in the loft like visitors. As Clara unpinned her hair in their bedroom, not just Ethan's anymore, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was unrecognizable from the desperate creature who'd stumbled onto this ranch months ago. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her. "That I barely know who I am anymore." "I do." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're Clara Cross, teacher, mother, crack shot with a rifle, maker of the best biscuits in the territory, and the bravest woman I know." "I don't feel brave." "Brave isn't about not feeling scared. It's about acting despite the fear." He pressed a kiss to her neck. "You stood up to 8 armed men to protect Samuel. You chose to trust again after the world showed you its worst face. You decided to stay and build instead of run. If that's not brave, I don't know what is." Clara turned in his arms. "You saved us." "No," he corrected. "We saved each other." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Clara woke to find Ethan already up, standing by the window with coffee. It was such a familiar sight now, but somehow different with the ring on her finger and the knowledge that this was permanent. "Mason really won't come back?" she asked, joining him. "Heard from Thompson yesterday. Mason lit out for California. Seems the federal marshals really were interested in that stage robbery." Ethan pulled her against his side. "He's gone. Clara, for good." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "So we're safe?" "As safe as anyone can be out here." He set down his cup, turning to face her fully. "But you're not helpless anymore. You know how to shoot, how to stand your ground. Samuel knows he can protect what he loves. And you've got a husband who'd walk through fire for you both." "Ethan?" Clara said softly. "Yeah? Thank you for seeing me as more than what I was willing to become, for believing I deserved better." "You always deserved better," he said firmly. "You just needed reminding." Samuel burst through the door then, already dressed and eager. "Pa, are we working with the horses today? You promised to teach me to ride proper." "Pa." The word made Ethan's face light up in a way Clara had never seen. After chores and breakfast, Ethan said, "And only if your ma says it's okay." "Can I, Mama, please?" Clara pretended to consider. "Well, I suppose, but you mind everything your PA tells you. I will. I promise. Samuel hugged them both, then raced outside to start his chores with enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. Pa, Ethan repeated wonderingly. Never thought I'd hear that. You'll hear it every day now, Clara promised, along with requests for stories, help with schoolwork, and probably a fair amount of Pa, look what I can do. Sounds perfect. They stood together in the doorway, watching Samuel scatter the chickens in his excitement. The sun was climbing, painting the prairie golden. In the distance, the mountains stood like sentinels, no longer barriers to cross but protective walls around their home. No more chains, Clara said softly. No more chains. Ethan agreed. Just choices, and love, and whatever life we build together. Clara fingered the rifle that still stood by the door, now a tool rather than a desperate necessity. She thought of the woman who'd arrived here months ago, ready to sell her soul for her child's life. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. I love you, she said, the words still new enough to feel like a revelation. I love you too, Ethan replied. Both of you, my family. Family. The word wrapped around Clara like a warm blanket. Not the family she'd lost, or the one she'd thought she'd never have again, but something new, something chosen, something earned through trust and courage and the revolutionary idea that she deserved care, not chains. As she went inside to start breakfast, in her kitchen, in her home, for her family, Clara sent up a prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For men like Ethan who saw strength where others saw only desperation. For the courage to accept love when it was offered freely. And for the knowledge that sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from running, but from choosing to stay. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and illuminating a future that, for the first time in so long, looked bright with promise. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Ethan's journey. Your support means everything.